Hi everyone, and welcome to a very special edition of SpoiledCoils. Today we have author Terrence A. Harrison here with us to discuss his book, Naked Truth, The Relationship Between Religion, Sex, and the Bible. So I am SpoiledCoils, as you know, and this is Jacqueline, my co-host today, and this is Mr. Terrence Harrison. So could you please, further introduce yourself and, share your credentials with our viewers, including your profession?
Okay. Well, as you've heard, I'm Terrence Harrison. My formal training is in the area of religion and theology. I have 2 degrees in that. I have been in church life and spiritual things for quite a number of years. Performed different functions in church, elder, those kinds of things. I've been interested in relationships and sexuality for a long time. Researched it for over 25 years and find the subject fascinating. It's one of my favorite subjects to talk about, and I'm quite open about talking about it. So I'm hoping that we can do just that today, and to engage you, the listening audience, the viewing audience, into a conversation that we'll find mutually enjoyable and beneficial. And I thank my host today for inviting me to do this. Appreciate that.
Okay, so I think we'll just jump right into it. So basically, as soon as I opened the book and I was into the introduction, there were so many points that really stuck out to me as relatable points, and some things that maybe I want a little bit of clarity on, maybe some explanation, I guess. Okay. So in the intro on page 2, you say that the church has a high expectation of righteousness, and that it makes people hide who they really are. Could you further explain that and how it affects, I guess, people and as well as their sexuality?
Yeah, there's something about church life that makes it difficult to really come out and be who you are. And it's not that you have the desire to act up or act out, but because you're human and you're wretched, you're not perfect, the imperfect aspects of you, it's difficult to really share that sort of part of who you are. So it makes you want to hide it, because the expectation in church is that we're supposed to be striving for the mastery, we're looking toward perfection, we're trying to be as much like Jesus Christ as possible, but we have this wretchedness that's within us that makes us do stuff sometimes. And unless you really find close friendship where you can genuinely share, then you really don't have the mechanism for sharing. And so you pretend to be what you're really not, and you struggle alone. So it's a little bit more difficult in a church setting, being that righteousness is the expectation and the gold standard. Whereas if you were outside the church setting, in the world, your friends just accept you for who you are. They know that you're this way or that way, and you can talk about that and deal with things in a normal way. But for some reason, it's a little bit more difficult to get that done in a church setting.
Speaking of that, you mentioned that sex is a stern and avoided topic in church, which kind of goes into the fact that you have to hide yourself. Sex is a thing that is kind of revealing to yourself. You said that it's when your struggle with this flesh began. So do you feel like your struggle with the flesh was amplified through your church surroundings?
It's a very interesting question you ask, because the closer you get to God is the more your flaws are revealed. Not only that, but the more you try to do what is right is the more your wretched side wants to act up. So in a church setting, you're probably more likely to see your struggles, and since we're talking about sexuality today, your sexual struggles might well be amplified because you're trying to keep those urges down and be a better person. The problem with doing that is that sometimes your focus on being better makes you focus on the sin that easily besets you, as the apostle says. And once your focus gets onto that one thing that besets you so easily, the more you try to overcome that is the more power you lend it. And so your efforts then go into this kind of spiral where you try, you fall, you try again, you fall, you try again. And the more you try is the harder it is. So it's the better thing to do is to acknowledge that you have a particular problem and then focus your life on other things that are good. So rather than focus on the problem that you have, your focus should be on becoming a better person. So maybe that involves getting education. Maybe that involves really taking stock of where you want to be and how to get there. And hooking up with right people who are positive and that sort of thing. But if you focus on the problem that you have, it's going to be a tough thing to battle against.
So, I mean, what would you suggest? Just, I mean, if you're not struggling to try and overcome it, what are the solutions left? Kind of just lend yourself to it and focus on the other things in the hopes that the struggle will meet the...
I think one of the secrets that's been hidden from our eyes is the fact that while it seems a good thing to struggle against some of what is difficult in your life, it's actually counterproductive to focus on what is wrong rather than focus on those things that are good and right. So if you focus on what is wrong, it's sort of like trying, the illustration that I give in the book is, it's almost impossible to not do something, because in order to understand not, your brain has to first understand is. So if someone says to a child, don't touch the stove, that child doesn't really have a good way of understanding what not touching the stove is until he touches it. So once he touches it, he knows, oh, ouch, not touch the stove.
Right.
And that's the nature of humanity that's fallen, is that we tend to want to do the not things before we can really gain an understanding that, oh, okay, that's actually bad for me. And we're driven to doing that sort of thing. So rather than trying to not do something, your best bet is to try to do something else that's positive. So if you've got issues in this one area, yeah, you're going to know that you have issues in that area, but you're better off focusing on other positives in your life than on that one negative, because it can consume you.
I think that's very true. But I also wanted to know, do you feel like if the church provided a better education about, or a better support system, I'll say a better support system for the things that people are struggling with, like it shouldn't have to be, I'm going to go to an AA meeting, or I'm going to, struggle internally and, be crying inside, but when I come to church, I'm smiling and I'm happy. I feel like it should be kind of like a forum where, like the relatability needs to be there, because that superficiality of holiness that you talk about, that they all admit, I guess, it becomes a problem for people who really do want to share and really do want, or need a certain kind of guidance or a certain kind of support, because they don't feel like they can share the truth of what they're feeling with their church members, which it should be the complete opposite, I feel.
Yeah. One of the sad things about church is, number one, there are not a lot of professional people who can really provide the kind of resources that people need in a certain area. So you often have to seek professional guidance apart from church. Secondly, there's something to the kind of spirituality that exists in church that makes people think that it's enough to just pray about it. So you hear that phrase a lot in church. If you tell someone, I have an issue with this or I'm struggling with that, probably the first response that you'll get is, pray about it, or I'm going to pray for you, and that sort of thing. And that's a wonderful thing, because prayer is one of the most powerful tools in the toolbox. But we need, as human beings, more support than that. And to the extent that, let's say, for example, in West Indian churches that have a lot of people who are from the old country, there isn't a lot of specialized education and training in providing support to today's youth, especially, who struggle with drugs and addiction to so many different things. So all they can offer is what they have to offer, which is prayer. So in order to get the other kinds of support, you have to bring in outside resources in order to help alleviate those problems. And if your church is open-minded enough, you might be able to access some of those resources. But if they're not, then you're pretty much stuck trying to talk to your friends or seek it elsewhere.
I mean, that sounds a little like counterintuitive to what church is supposed to be. I mean,
Yeah.
we go to church and we say that we profess, I mean, knowledge comes from God. Yeah, I mean, we know that. That's the basis of all knowledge. But as church members, to deal with these aspects, these natural aspects of human life, we have to seek outside counseling. To me, that kind of shows there's a breakdown in something, that something is not right, that we have to resort to that.
Yeah.
You know?
The good news is that if we can shift our perspective a little bit, what we'll see is that God has not deposited all knowledge in any one place. So it's not all in the church and it's not all outside the church. God's people are everywhere. Every human being that's born into the world is a child of God. So to seek out knowledge where it exists and truth where it exists means that sometimes you'll get that knowledge and truth in church and sometimes you'll get it outside. You just have to be wise in your as to what resources to access.
No, that's a good point. I think it's very true.
Okay, so further on in the intro, you listed quite a few sexual references in the Bible. So what would you say to those people who would say, though those parts are mentioned, that they shouldn't be a focal point of the Bible? You know, they're not something to be focused on. Like sex is, it's just a part of every day.
Yeah, I think that those people they exhibit some of what we see is the sum total result or the cumulative result of what Christianity has tried to do over the years, which is to brush certain things aside as being less important. And though we intuitively know that it's important because it impacts our lives so profoundly, because we have a great discomfort in talking about those things, we tend to want to not talk about them. So although we see things that glare out at us from the scriptures, we tend to want to dim the lights on that so that the focus gets shifted elsewhere, And it's easy to shift the focus elsewhere because, we talk about the Holy Spirit and Jesus died for us and we're living in the end of time and Jesus is coming soon, and those kind of things should be our focus. Rightly so. But we're also in the tarrying time where we have to occupy until Jesus comes. And while we're occupying, we're assailed by all of this stuff that is both within us and outside us. And those things need to be addressed, or else you can easily take your eye off Jesus in the time that you have to wait for his return because, life happens.
Okay.
And if you don't deal with life as it happens, then the very Jesus you're looking for, you might be so carried away by the stuff that happens in day-to-day life that Jesus is lost to you.
I feel like as people, we're always seeking for, excitement, and we look outside of everywhere but the Bible, like reality television or thrill seeking and all that type of stuff. But a lot of the examples that you provided of references of sex in the Bible, they really do seem better than any reality show or television drama, because a lot of them I didn't even know.
Yeah.
And
there's some stuff in there.
Yeah, the Bible is really full of a lot of drama, for lack of a better word.
Yeah. I mean, I would really invite any person that's listening and watching to take the book of Genesis and just read there are 50 chapters in Genesis. Read from chapter 1 all the way through chapter 50. And you'll be shocked at some of the stuff that you find in the Bible. I mean, there's some stuff in there that you would never have dreamed would be in the Bible. And you're thinking to yourself, why did God allow this to happen, first of all? And then, why did he tell Moses to record this? Like, what is really the point of this story? And for each person, you may come up with a different answer, but when we sit down and discuss it, there's going to be some consensus. And part of the consensus is that when we decided to shift away from God and to not obey